My favorite part of Borderlands is struggling through the game, not knowing what I'm doing with a wimpy ass character that is absolutely getting their butt kicked the entire time. Ha! Said literally no one ever. In this video, we are going to cover my badass Spore Warden Stabbomancer hybrid craziness, and it is insanely awesome. Stick around, we're going to cover the skills used, stat points allocation, the gear optimization, something else that rhymes with Asian that definitely doesn't involve just one hand. And we'll start off with the technical information on the build with the skills and the gear before we get back to gameplay and some overall strategy discussion. So without further ado, let's get popping. This setup is a combination between the Spore Warden and the Stabbomancer. We are leaning very heavily into movement speed and critical hit damage. We do this because these two trees offer bonuses to damage based on movement speed, and also our super, aka our ulti, aka our ability or our skill, is from the shadows, which is going to give us a period of time where everything we shoot is just pure sweet critical hits. We want to max out Bounty of the Hunt. We need that action skill cooldown to come back as quickly as possible. This is a kill skill, which is incredibly beneficial towards our entire setup. We are going to be spamming our super slash skill slash ability on cooldown. Then we want to max out Eagle Eye because, duh, gun damage, baby. Then we proceed to maxing out Windrunner. That's the classic movement speed fire rate buff. And we need our medicinal mushroom. Our friend there is super helpful, so it's nice to have him be able to resuscitate us when we are down and out in combat. As mentioned, our super is from the shadows. That is just obvious. We need that. Just smite our foes. As you can tell, we don't go all the way down into the Spore Warden tree, and that's because we need to heavily invest towards the bottom portion of the Stabbomancer tree. On this Spore tree, though, you could invest into the skill which gives you bonus critical damage when you actually hit a critical shot, like a headshot, and also bonus damage when you're ADSing. Thing is, the gun setup we're using, okay, there's no real thing. I hate aiming. I don't want to aim. So if you want to aim, put the 3 points into the buff, which gives you a bonus for how long you're holding down, aiming down sights. It's incredibly powerful, but bro, I don't like to aim. This is ridiculous. The final capstone skill of the Spore Warden tree, also not that dope. It gives a chance to ricochet shots, but as you'll see with the setup we're using, that's literally not a problem. We have no problem with controlling large amounts of enemies with our two primary weapons, so don't really worry about those. We're gonna get more damage from the Stabbomancer tree. Speaking of, we're going to max out Arsenal. We're going to max out Haste. These two skills are going to buff our melee attack speed, our movement speed, our gun damage, our melee damage, and our spell damage. All incredibly useful for our setup. Obviously, we are going to max out Swift Death, which buffs our damage based on our movement speed. 16% at default walk speed with my class mod. Sorry, armor. That gives us +3 to this. Very nice. Big, meaty chunks of damage as we move around faster. Because it's taken me roughly 3 months to work on this video due to my inability to learn Premiere Pro, I did improve this setup. Ignore the class point in Alchemical Agent. That skill is not worth it. That gives a buff when you do melee critical hits. It applies a status effect. Don't do that. Instead, put 3 points into Nimble Fingers, which gives us a fire rate and a spell damage buff after dealing melee damage. This is important because it will proc once we hit our capstone tree skill. Executioner's Blade gives us a 20% chance to have a random spinning melee thingy come out, which counts as melee damage, and it does proc this fire rate and spell damage buff. It is pretty sweet. Can't recommend it enough. You have 1 extra point to play with. You can either put that into Exploit Their Weakness. So for instance, if you freeze or spell status an enemy, they'll take a 2% damage buff, or conversely, you could pump it somewhere into the Spore Warden tree. Obviously, they're going to max out Sneak Attack, which gives us huge chunks of bonus critical hit damage. Elusive, you can put a point into if you are down with the run and gun playstyle. As I stated earlier, if you're going to actually be aiming, this one's probably not that helpful. You are going to really struggle to aim down sights while you are sprinting with this skill active. 1,000 cuts is just god tier. Oof. At level 5, it is 1% per stack of damage for each critical hit you apply. The stack's 25 times. Oof. This is huge damage on this skill, and that's why we need to go all the way down here on the Stabbomancer tree. Let's get to where we pay the bills. This is our gear. I only run 2 guns. I know. Talk about meta. I don't even try new guns anymore. These 2 guns are fundamentally broken. For our first one, which is our boss slaying behemoth of a hand cannon, it's the Masterwork Handbow. Any variation of this gun is going to do wonders for your setup. I would just pay a huge amount of attention to the base damage as well as the critical hit damage bonus in the middle of the flavor text there. They are the two things you care about. The zoom doesn't really change. The fire rate doesn't change. You're only going to get one shot per magazine. The fire rate's mediocre at best. The accuracy is mediocre at best. Everything is mediocre, but this thing is beautiful because when you hit critical shots, which in your super, that is literally every single time you pull the trigger and actually hit, although excluding sometimes it glitches out. I don't know why that happens. Anyway, you're going to get that one shot back and you can just pop, 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 pop. It reloads. You're just slaying bosses. Huge damage, like 50k hits per shot on this gun. And it also shoots out, I think, 6 more crossbows once you do get a critical hit. That's your boss slaying gun. It is very, very powerful damage on each shot fired that is a critical. The next one is our mobbing gun. Also very effective for bosses, but pay attention to that ammo count when using the iridescent liquid cooling of nerves. This gun is absolutely beautiful. I found the damage ×2, which consumes 2 ammo per shot. This thing blows through my fully upgraded 1100 pistol rounds like nobody's business. The cool thing about this and why we love it is because once we hit critical hits, it does not use the cooling of this type of gun. The Skull Dugger, or formerly known as the Bandit guns in previous Borderlands games, have a gigantic clip, and that clip doesn't really ever run out, but it does overheat, and you have to like unjam the gun. You don't have to worry about that if you're getting critical hits. It doesn't increase the heat or the charge of this weapon, so you can just keep making it rain bullets. And the 10.27 fire rate is just... oh, I love this gun. This gun is so good. This gun is so good. Any variant of this works. It doesn't matter. You will struggle to find a ×2. I believe that's the iridescent prefix. Very rare. It took me a long time to find one. Totally worth it. But if you find a regular one, they're all amazing and very, very sweet. I would like to point out that this melee weapon is one of the best ones for our setup possible, and that's because of the bonus on the bottom there. Echo. Melee attacks deal 10% of all non-melee damage dealt by the Fate Maker over the last 10 seconds as bonus damage. That means if you've just done 1 million damage over the past 10 seconds and you get that melee off, I don't know what 10% of a million is, but it's at least 15. So it's a it's a high number. 100k melee chunk damage is very nice, and you will definitely feel it if you've done a huge amount of damage over the last 10 seconds. I typically blow my entire super, hold down the trigger, do what I gotta do, and then get a melee off before I disengage. Big, big damaging hits. For our ring jewelry fingers, for our fingy things, we have 3 things we are looking for and 3 things only. We need gun damage as a primary stat, and we need pistol critical hit damage, and we need skill cooldown, and we need skill duration. Now, if you can find one with all 3 of those modifiers on a gun damage ring, you have just hit the lottery, my friend. I haven't been able to do that. I am just sort of slumming it with this this current legendary one. It is chaotic, so the gun damage of 17.1 is very nice. And action cooldown is our best cooldown. And action skill cooldown rate is our best friend. We want that. I prioritize it over pistol critical hit damage because we live in our super ability. It's just the most amazing thing of all time. For our second ring, it's more of the same gun damage plus pistol critical hit damage. Like I said, I'd love to have with action skill cooldown and or duration, but I have not been that lucky. For our necklace, we are going to be running a legendary gun damage Stabbomancer power Ami. This is also going to give us action skill cooldown rate. I would advise you to really pay attention to amulets because they are very rare and hard to find with all of these stats. The dark magic efficiency, not really that useful for us, just for the record. But the gun damage is huge. Stabbomancer power is going to give us a bonus to our duration on our action skill, which is just beautiful. You definitely want to make sure you do, in fact, have a Stabbomancer power bonus on your amulet. And then action skill cooldown is very helpful as well. Before I found this sweet legendary one, I was rocking a blue Stabbomancer power Ami with some trash like lightning skill bonus, whatever. But it had 40% action skill cooldown. That can roll on blues. And I advise you to run just pure action skill cooldown until you get something really dope. Our shield is going to be the Desperate Cursed Wit. This shield gives us big damage buffs once our shield is broken. It also gives us damage reduction, which, to be honest, I don't really know if I feel. This character is very squishy. You're not tanking this thing. You literally hide and go invisible on your super ability. So you're not soaking bullets if you don't have to. You're going to go down a lot, most likely, with this character. It's very squishy. But the bonus damage to enemies that are close is very helpful. I cannot recommend it enough. The only negative about this shield is it talks a lot of shit. This shield will not shut up. You kill an enemy and it talks. You die, it talks. You take damage, it talks. You shoot somebody and like miss, it talks. This is a talking legendary and it never shuts up. But other than that, I can't recommend the shield enough. Class mod, aka armor, we want that sweet Stabbomancer power. The Spore Warden power is not really that relevant. I think it buffs our companion, but again, who really cares? He's pretty squishy to begin with. We want these skills buffed. These are increasing our gun damage and our movement speed from both of the trees. Very helpful. I was fortunate enough to get a roll which I can't seem to beat. This is only purple. It's not even chaotic or volatile. It's giving us buffed gun damage. Orb regeneration rate on this character is actually horrible. It's almost like a nerf. We don't want shield. We want our shield broken, so we get those buffs that I mentioned discussing our shield. And movement speed. That's buffing our survivability by our ability to dodge, as well as increasing our damage on the move. Farming armor is pretty painstaking, and there are a lot of different variations you can get. I would just make sure you pay attention to see if it is utilizing or buffing any of the skills which increase your critical hit damage or your gun damage, and ideally movement speed. There are quite a few options out there, so don't get discouraged if you can't find a sprinting vandal like this one. For our spell, we are using a jacketed arcane bolt, and this is beautiful for our setup because it has a blazing fast cooldown and it's dark magic damage, which does give us health back. We don't really have any ways to get health back besides an enchantment on our shield, so this is very helpful to keep us alive. The cooldown of 6.3 seconds is amazing, and it's even better because the perk of this legendary spell is that it gives us cooldown on scoring critical hits with the spell. And when we're in our super, things tend to be critical, so they come back really quickly. It's sweet. If you're in the super using the iridescent fast-firing pistol, holding down the trigger, you can actually just spam this spell because it just comes back so quickly due to the fact it's hitting for crits. If you can't find something like this, just go for very fast cooldown on your spell with dark magic so you can have some form of life leech. I didn't want to delve too deeply onto enchantments because they are one of the harder things to roll and find in this game. I would say it's pretty obvious what you need to do. You need to buff your gun damage, or your critical hit damage, or even your frost damage from your enchantments. This is so important to just squeeze out as much damage as possible. You have a lot of options with this. There are increases to gun damage, increases to frost damage, increases to all damage. Just know that the enchantments do not stack. That means if you have on spellcast increased frost damage by 50% for 10 seconds on 2 pieces of equipment, you are only getting that bonus one time. Moving right along to our stat points, it's very simple. You want to max out strength and you want to max out attunement. Strength gives us more critical damage, which is imperative, and attunement gives us skill cooldown for the shadows, our super, so we can just pump out those critical hits as frequently as possible. Everything else is surplus requirements. If you're thinking you need health, you're playing the wrong setup. Don't take damage with this character. You're not going to last very long. I really wanted to showcase this boss fight with Drill because it highlights a lot of the strengths and weaknesses of this setup. As you can tell, I'm actually trying to make sure I don't have 50% health. That's because our shield is going to buff our damage output to enemies that are close, but you're playing a dangerous game because the pool of purple lava around Drill is just going to continuously suck your life away. It does buff your damage. We melted that first phase very, very quickly. Conversely, it's a little bit more sketchy when enemies are further away. You aren't going to be chai sniping anybody from the, from the map border. I'm trying to use the iridescent pistol here, but the range thing really isn't this character's forte. You also want to make sure that you are very careful when you pick and choose your spots to use your skill ability. And it's because we can't really damage him a crazy amount from this range, but we do know that he's going to come back in eventually. And at that point, it's going to be all signs of go to bust out our super and absolutely chunk this man down into oblivion. There are some issues with my style here. I really should be jumping in the purple lava to try to lose that 50% health to get that bonus damage. As you can see, I mixed in a melee there to try to get the echo ability on our melee weapon to do the damage that we just did over the last 10 seconds. Wasn't really that effective. I'm not sure if I maybe mistimed it, but it doesn't really matter. He is now entering his next phase. We did pretty well. At this point, I have been staring at my ammo count because, as I mentioned, the iridescent pistol just blows through rounds. But I'm realizing now that I have ample to kind of hold down the trigger. You do need to burst it though, because you can tell how quickly this gun does overheat if you are not hitting those juicy criticals and getting your free of charge hits. But in a situation like this, we know the boss will come back very soon, and we're going to try out our masterwork this time just to showcase how much more damage we can do with this gun in our hands. It doesn't really quite matter as much what gun you're using. Just go with what's feeling fun. Both are incredibly viable, but I do think the Masterwork is the DPS champion. The iridescent pistol, though, is just so fun to just hold down the trigger and watch things disappear. It's dealer's choice. Find one, you're set. Find the other, you're laughing, bud. That's all the information you need to know to get on your merry way and create your very own beautiful and handsome and or pretty SporeMancer setup and just start slaying those baddies out there in the Wonderlands. If you've liked this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, especially if you have any constructive feedback on how I could do a better job. Thank you so much for sticking around. Until next time, we out.